This week on the show, we've got an interview with Kristoff, the creator of Mandoc. He tells us how the project got started and what its current status is across the various BSDs. We're also going to have a mini tutorial on using PF to throttle bandwidth. So, of course, this week's news, answers to all your emails, and even some cheesy mailing list gold coming up on BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 63, A Man's Man, recorded November 12th, 2014. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you guys with us this week. Looking forward to another exciting show. And of course, we're back from California, from NetBSD, which I'm sure we'll want to fill you in on how that went. So
yes, let's get into that.
First of all, First of all, I just want to say thanks to the guys who came out, who came over and introduced themselves to us and said that's why they had come, because we'd recommended it on the show.
Yes,
so,
there were quite a few people that came just because of the show, and we were glad to see a bunch of people. It was also just interesting to hear the number of people that came up and were talking about the Voxer interview we did and how that went.
Yes.
And it was good to see the guy, Voxer had 4 or 5 people at the conference, including George Kola, who was one of the people we interviewed from Voxer, and that was cool. And I also put him together with Justin Gibbs, and I were trying to help him debug a ZFS issue he was having.
Well, that was definitely cool. And the Voxer interview definitely is one of our most talked about ones since we've been at conferences and whatnot. A lot of people mentioned they like that. So we're going to try and do more interviews like that.
Exactly.
We've got some other companies in the list that we need to interview and discuss their transition to BSD.
Yeah, we talked to a couple of different people. A couple of the places are kind of in that position. It's like, well, once the company officially announces somewhere else that they're using this FreeBSD for this or that or whatever, then sure, I'm sure they'd be fine with me doing an interview about it. Sadly, we tried and tried, but the Sony people just weren't allowed to do anything.
Well, there's a lot of corporate stuff
right,
there.
like,
I mean,
obviously the guy would have loved to do it, but apparently, he did a presentation at MeetBSD, and the Sony lawyers edited his slideshow to the point he couldn't actually say FreeBSD. He had to always just say BSD.
That's right, because you can't get too specific, apparently.
Or something about
whatever.
The trademarks and so on. I don't know.
Well,
they were just being silly, but they're lawyers. What do you expect?
It's lawyers and corporate stuff, and you have to deal with some of that. But he did a good job with the presentation. Yes. It was neat to hear about PS4, of course, running BSD, which is pretty slick. And it was just a fun conference in general. It was a little different because they flip flopped it this year. We had the MeetBSD conference first, and then the Dev Summit was the days after. So that was a little unusual, but
it actually fits our schedule slightly better, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it did.
Yeah. It did. And it also, I think people got more time to relax and see stuff. Although, there was a couple of people who could only stay for the weekend and couldn't come back on Monday. And there were a couple of people that only made it on Monday or Tuesday, but we got quite a bit of good stuff. And we also scored a couple of good interviews as well.
We did. And you guys will, of course, hear those in upcoming episodes a little later this year. But some exciting stuff, so you'll have to watch out for that. We have links to the photos from the MeetBSD Google Plus. It looks like looks like the MeetBSD California account here. So we have links to the album. So if you want to take a look, see what you missed, see some pictures of all the folks who are there. Definitely, it was a good time to be had by all, and well-attended conference too.
Yes,
I think
it was
200 plus people. What they say, 225?
I don't know the number, but we filled the room anyway.
Yeah, the room was filled, and I was especially glad to see the Dev Summit so full.
Yes.
So there was a lot of folks there on Monday at the Developer Summit.
Yeah, well, we got a lot of people out from a bunch of different companies that use FreeBSD but don't normally come out to the Developer Summits, and their input was quite valuable.
And it helped also being local to a lot of these places as well. There was a lot of people who just drove over and didn't have to fly anywhere.
Exactly.
So that was it's definitely needed to have this in Silicon Valley at some point so that people can do that who normally couldn't get away and travel, say, to Europe or Canada or whatever. So this was an awesome opportunity.
Yes, we also had some fun as well. iX put on a little demo of their high availability for the FreeNAS. So they had two free.
Yes.
You can see the picture here. They had two FreeNAS minis up on a table connected to a server, and on the server they were mounting the ZFS pool off the pair of FreeNASs and running a build world on it. And then they invited members of the audience to come up to the front there and pull out one of the 8 hard drives, or one of the 4 hard drives in each of the 2 FreeNASs. So people would just at random get to pull out a hard drive, and then pick a method of destruction for it. They had like a hacksaw, a Tesla coil, a hammer. The Tesla coil didn't work so well. Most people opted for the hammer.
It was just more fun.
Yes. But it was very fun to watch, Powell and Kirk McCusick and people attacking helpless hard drives with a hammer. The guy from Panasys flipped it over, specifically targeting the chip on the back side of the hard drive and smashing it to bits.
Well, we should mention, though, this was held at Western Digital's office, and we did not destroy a WD hard drive.
No, I think they were
a bunch of lousy old Seagates,
something
apparently.
like that. Yeah.
But still, it's pretty neat. So I guess they had a build world going on in the background there, and the trick was to see how many drives can you pull out of these 2 systems before you can't do the build world anymore.
Yep.
But
and the answer was 7 out of the 8 hard drives.
Well, I mean, technically they pulled all 8 out. It kept going for a little while because of the cache.
Yeah, it stalled when it needed the next file, and it was trying to read it, and,
it did.
And ZFS was just like, yeah.
Yeah, all my drives have gone away now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a pretty epic demonstration. That was a lot of fun.
But yes, it's mostly fun to watch people attacking hard drives with hammers.
So definitely some good talks there. As we mentioned, the Sony talk, that was interesting. And Brendan Gregg gave a talk on performance and benchmarking.
Yes, and then he also gave a separate talk during the Dev Summit, both of which were amazing. And so
he's with Netflix, for those who don't know.
We used to be with Joyent, and he's also worked on ZFS. I think he did a lot of the work on L2 Arc. But yes, currently he's at Netflix doing performance stuff, and so that got him into FreeBSD, and he's very excited about it. And so we cornered him and got a great interview, which we'll have coming up in a couple of weeks.
Definitely. So yeah, it was an exciting time. We also had talk about the new pipe cut utility coming soon,
which is very useful, especially if you're kind of new to Unix, which a lot of people are. But even as a pro, you definitely still want this. It just makes your life so much easier. There's always been this approach of kind of, do it, see what it looks like, do some more, and go back, forward.
A lot of backspacing, and then let me delete that out of here. And whatnot.
Right, and you get pretty fast at it with your VI key bindings, but it's still not the same as actually having this tool, and it's really cool. And so we got a talk with the author of that as well. We also got to hear Kirk give a short section of his history of the BSDs. And I bought the DVD version, which is 4 hours. I'm going to have lots of fun.
Well, we had Jordan gave kind of an overview, looking back and then a look ahead. 20 years.
That's
the next 20 years.
Yeah, that was from the same one as EuroBSDCon, although slightly updated. So that was good too.
Yep. So yeah, it was.
And then we had a party.
Good time all around. Yes, we had a party. Of course, you can't go to California and have a Meet BSD without the party.
I got my picture taken with Beastie.
Yeah, you and several other people I see here. A lot of the IX folks. So definitely very cool. But yeah, it was definitely a good time. So I know they don't do these every year, but every 2. Yep. So you got 2 more years till the next one. So if you see these and this looks like something interesting to you, try and make it out 2 years from now.
Yep.
You need to come out to the next
if you're
one.
on the East Coast, hopefully there'll be a VBSDCon about the same time next year.
Yes. That would be cool.
Kind of trades off with Meet BSD.
So definitely try and make it out to one of those. Lots of good stuff. Good things to hear. A lot of good people to hang out with. And, of course, if you can get to the Dev Summit, too, that's a lot of fun, especially as we talked about, what's coming in 11 and, what needs to be done, what's ready to be pulled in, etc. So definitely fascinating stuff. A lot of cool things coming in 11. I'm already excited for it.
Yep.
Well, cool.
I guess, also... Groff got handed off to Hiroki Seita, who took him to Japan. And
as a nice segue into the next thing we need to mention.
Exactly. Just as a reminder, if you would like a free trip to Tokyo, you must submit a paper by the deadline, which is November
It's the
28th.
28th, I think. Yeah.
Yes. So you only have like 2 weeks left to write a proposal to do a talk at Asia BSD Con, which will be March 12th through 15th of 2015.
Nice.
I've already
I'm
booked
about
my flight and hotel. So
yeah. I'm about half done with my paper. I'm gonna try and finish it this a little later this week, maybe tomorrow.
yeah, I have to work on mine as well.
It's a little tough to do when you're trying to do 10.1 releases just around the corner here too. So we're trying to get that out the door. But
Right.
yeah,
And
got to finish that paper.
I'm trying to write mine in such a way it's like, well, I need to be right about where I will be in this project in March. Right?
Yep.
And it's like, well, I've got this much done so far, and I'm going to do this and this by then. But I don't want to be too far ahead, but I don't want to be too far behind.
Sure.
Gotta
Update it as you go a
exactly.
little bit.
But I gotta get the proposal together and get that sent in.
Cool. Okay. Well, actually, this is a good time, I guess, to transition into headlines for the week. And of course, I'm sure we'll discuss Meet BSD as
Yes.
things come to mind in future episodes.
I'm sure
later on today.
we'll actually see some commits based on stuff that was discussed at Meet BSD. And
Definitely. Okay, so first up in the headlines, we have, speaking of 11, we have FreeBSD has some news where they've gotten a new random device.
Yes.
So I guess it's got pretty much a major overhaul in current. So the C Spring or cryptographically secure pseudo-random number generator algorithm, Euro, now has a new alternative called Fortuna.
right, so Yarrow was developed by a number of people, including Bruce Schneier. And it's basically deprecated now, and they built basically a 2.0 kind of version that they call Fortuna. And so they've, Mark Murray and a bunch of other people have worked together to build that implementation, and it's now a loadable module. And the default currently is still Yarrow. However, you can, with just a little configuration change, switch it over to try the new one. And
they said most likely it will be the default in 11 release as well. So you can start playing with it now, but hopefully by 11.0 it's already on by default out of the box.
Also, they mentioned that the harvesting system, so how it gets random information to mix in with the stuff it gets from the Intel and so on, so that if the Intel is bad, it doesn't cause the random to be bad. But just to random stuff they get, it used to be based on network traffic and stuff, but they also now get a bunch of stuff out of the UMA, which is the memory allocator. And because of, systems have a lot more RAM now and we kind of allocate all over the place, that provides a bunch of good entropy that no one can kind of predict how it's going to be.
Sure. Well, and what I like too, this new system has a pluggable module system. So you can add more sources of entropy, say for specific hardware devices that maybe is attached to your box or your appliance or whatever.
Exactly.
You could write a module which can then probe that and feed that entropy directly into Fortuna. So that's pretty slick. I think this is a much needed change, and it's neat to see that this made it in.
Yep. And they also mentioned the book Cryptography Engineering by Ferguson, Schneider, and Kono, which has all the details on how the new Fortuna system works. And they also include the ISBN number if you want to find that book and have a read.
Yep. Well, they mentioned also if you want all the gory details, it's there, but heck, you should read it anyway. It's probably just a good read to understand how this stuff works.
Yep. And Mark Murray, who did a lot of the later work on this, mentioned thanks to everybody who helped and the talks at, I guess it was EuroBSDCon last year and Cambridge Dev Summit and so on. Lots of people worked on it and also did reviews. Dag Erling, the security officer, Werner Loesch, Robert Watson, Edward Napolitano, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, and a bunch of other people all did reviews on it, and then it got approved by the security officer, and it's committed now, although off by default, until it can be tested some more. But basically, they're asking people to please try this and see
So
how it works.
You definitely want to try it, make sure nothing breaks. There's no regressions, obviously, but see how well it works on your box.
So we get all the problems sorted out in time that we can have this for 11.
They mentioned like the UMA allocator is disabled by default, so you'll need to flip that on if you'd like to use that.
Using the UMA allocator as a source of entropy is off by default, yes.
Yes. So, cool. Okay, well, so as I mentioned, it should be hitting an 11.0 release. We haven't heard any word about it MFCing to 9 or
I
10.
don't
Probably,
know. It,
probably
it
not.
might be too big of a change and break.
Yeah,
Yeah. Although if it's optional,
that'd be my
maybe it's
guess.
hard to say.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Depends how much they had to change for it to work.
True,
Yep.
true. Okay, well, next up in the headlines, OpenBSD Tor relays and network diversity. So, in the past, we've talked about how we should have more BSD-based Tor nodes, and a couple times in previous episodes this has come up. And the Tor relays mailing list has also had some recent discussions about increasing the diversity in the Tor network, specifically by adding more OpenBSD nodes.
Or
So that, I guess,
FreeBSD as well.
FreeBSD
So
as
they have
well.
some
Yeah.
stats here. Currently, there are just shy of 6,000 Linux nodes, 1,600 Windows nodes, 173 FreeBSD, 55 Darwin, which I'm guessing is mostly OS X, 44 OpenBSD, and 7 NetBSD, 6 Sunhouse, 4 Bitrig, 2 people running Debian KFreeBSD, and 1 person running Dragonfly. And
Nice.
they say that there's no reason Linux should be deployed 20 times more often than free or OpenBSD. And like we've talked about this, companies that do big scale stuff like VeriSign with running the .com and .net domain name registries, they purposely only put a third of their boxes on Linux, a third on FreeBSD, and a third on Solaris, specifically so that if there is a problem, it never affects more than 1/3 of their stuff.
Only vulnerable to 1/3 of the problems or whatever.
And we've learned that monocultures are bad, right? Having everything be based on the same thing isn't a good thing. And this is why, we're hoping that there's an alternative to OpenSSL, because we've seen what happens when everybody uses exactly the same software. It means that one bug affects everything on the internet. And so, yes, like they're saying here, one problem with the pseudo-random number generator in Linux or something, and now a vast majority of the Tor network doesn't work properly. And whereas if they split this up across Linux, FreeBSD, and OpenBSD, most problems would only affect one of those at a time. And that would leave them with the 2/3 of the network still intact. And yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah. So this is the challenge. We need more people to run this on BSD. So we've seen in the mailing list posts a few folks saying they'd convert their Linux nodes to OpenBSD to try and help out. But if this is something you'd be interested in helping with, of course, we have tutorials that we've done in the past about how to run node yourself on any of the BSDs. So pretty straightforward to get started. Just go ahead and follow the guide there. The Tor wiki page we'll mention on OpenBSD is pretty stinking out of date. It looks like it's about 9 years old and uses some old PF syntax. So maybe one of our listeners, if you're an OpenBSD guy, can help modernize that. That would be a great starting place for other users. Cool. Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to mention about the Tor stuff, Alan?
No, not really. Just that, yes, it'd be good to see not everything use Linux, because when there's a problem with Linux, it affects everything.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so now some FreeBSD news. Yes. So first up, SSP is now the default for FreeBSD ports.
Yes.
So what is SSP, you might ask, right?
Stack smashing protection.
Correct. So it's an additional layer of protection against buffer overflows that the compiler can give to binaries that it builds. So I guess this has now been turned on in the FreeBSD ports tree by default, and the package NGs that are packages that are getting produced will have it as well, but only for AMD 64 and i386 and i386 on 10.0 release and newer specifically. So this is going to apply to regular ports and binary packages, not the quarterly branch that only receives security updates. So you'll need to be on something a little newer to grab that. Also, if you were using one of the temporary NewXorg or SSP package repositories instead of the default ones, you'll probably want to switch back over to get this new stuff.
Those will stop being updated as of November 15th, which is 3 days from now.
Correct.
And now that NewXorg and SSP are on by default, there's no reason to have these two separate repos anymore.
Yeah, it's time to bring it back into the main line here.
Yep.
So NetBSD made this the default on i386 and AMD 64 about 2 years ago. And OpenBSD actually made this the default on all their architectures 12 years ago.
Yeah, so, they invented it almost. Not the idea of stacks, right? But but I think a lot of it had to do with making all the different applications support it nicely. And the FreeBSD ports tree is a lot bigger and takes a lot more work.
Sure. So, but we're
Yeah,
glad to see this got turned on and that the
exactly.
progress has been made now. So, next time you rebuild something from ports, it should be automatically hardened without any extra steps or config that you need to do on your
Yep.
end. So, this is great. This is kind of a no cost thing. You just do it. Okay. Well, next up, OpenBSD information about building an OpenBSD firewall and router. So
Nice.
we've discussed, of course, different software and configurations of building an OpenBSD router. We have a link here to a Reddit thread which focuses a little bit more on the hardware side, though. The original post is going to list some of the potential choices, but originally they were looking for something a bit cheaper than a Socrus. So most agree that if it's a course for a business, especially, it's worth the extra money to go with something that's well known in the BSD community. I mean,
Yep.
it just makes sense. A few of the other alternatives mentioned in the threads, though, are ALIX or the APU series from PC Engine, some
Yep.
Supermicro boards, etc. So lots of good information on here on what you could possibly get your hands on if you're looking at building a router. And through some of the comments, interestingly enough, we find out that QuakeCon runs OpenBSD on their network. So
Yeah.
how
Well,
cool
yeah,
is that?
they needed a router that was going to be able to handle having all these people making multiple connections and so on out. Like QuakeCon will have quite a few people at it. And yeah,
Mhm.
I'm sure many years ago, they weren't running OpenBSD. They were running some
Sure.
off-the-shelf router. And after it did, 100 or 500 translations or something, it was like, oh, I'm going to have to drop an
Yeah,
old
I'm
connection
done.
in order to make this new connection. Whereas if
Hmm.
you're using a real BSD with a firewall, you can, you have a little bit of RAM, you can have a massive state
You,
table. I
sure,
think the
sure.
default is
Tune that up to your needs.
32,000, but it's, one line in the config file, and all of a sudden you can handle 250,000 active translations. And
Hmm.
yeah, you're going to need that if you got, 1,000 gamers doing all their gamer things, trying
Sure.
to use your internet.
It grows exponentially.
Yeah.
Cool.
There's
So of course, oh, go
I was
ahead.
going to say, there's no point getting a big, fast internet connection for your conference if you have a router that can't handle having all the people use it,
Yeah,
and you'll never be able to pass that much traffic.
definitely. So of course, we hope that if you're listening to this, that you've been made the switch and you use some kind of BSD as your gateway. So again, we'll have links to the old tutorials we've run. If you haven't done that already, it might be a good time to make the switch.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Well, that's the end of our headlines for the week. So let's mention the first sponsor for this week is, of course, Tarsnap. And that URL is tarsnap.com/BSD Now. You want to go there, sign up, let them know that we sent you. So, of course, we've been talking Tarsnap for quite a while now.
Yes,
But yeah, Tarsnap, you need to be doing backups. And if you're going to be doing something, you want to do backups in an encrypted manner where you don't have to trust the remote end,
exactly.
that you don't have to worry about them promising that we will encrypt everything and promising we won't dedupe it and accidentally expose something that, oh, you shared that with 3 other people. Yeah, just no
Yep,
Dropbox stuff here.
exactly. And, I know a lot of people hear this every week and like, oh, I'll sign up later. I'm like, no, do it right now because,
Hmm.
otherwise you're not going to just, yeah, you're not going to realize that you
Back.
should have been doing the backups until you lose the data and then it's too late.
Yeah. Once you need the backup, it's too late to go back and do it. So
Yeah.
just get it done ahead of time. Go ahead and fill up your prepaid account. Only pay for what you use, and of course, Tarsnap makes it real easy to get set up with clients for just about anything under the sun. So again, tarsnap.com. Let them know we sent you, and go ahead and grab a client and get backing up your data. So we're joined now by Kristoff. Thank you so much for being on the show with us this week.
Thank you for inviting me.
Excellent. So first question we asked, tell us a little bit about yourself and how'd you first get into BSD?
I don't know how I actually first got into BSD. It probably would have been 10 or so years ago, maybe a little bit longer. Knowing me, I just probably wanted something that was more text oriented because
Sure.
when I used computers when I was younger, there was a lot of text and I'm comfortable. I like that.
Yep.
Graphics are a little confusing. I think also at the time, 10, 15 years ago, the graphical systems like Linux didn't really work.
Sure.
So it was a natural step. And since then, I use BSD in my day job, my regular work all the time. I work for myself. I'm a computational mathematician.
Okay.
So I use machines a lot. And usually these work together well because I, obviously will make my own source code. I'll make my own systems. I'll integrate them into BSD systems or otherwise. So I end up doing a lot of work on that.
Which BSD specifically?
I mostly use OpenBSD.
Okay.
Almost exclusively, actually, on my systems. I think most people, in terms of BSD, know me for having initially written Mandoc and the constellation of Mandoc tools like the original Man CGI. Well, not the original, that was done 400 years ago, but
Sure.
the other
Back on stone
original.
tablets and stuff, you know?
Yeah. And so that started in 2008. And since then, it's been more or less completely taken over by Ingo Schwarze, who spoke here today, or yesterday rather, to tutorials as well. And now I continue doing a little bit with Ingo here and there. I've taken a bit of a back seat in the last year or two. Before that, I was doing a lot of Mandoc stuff, but the pressures of day job sometimes take over for little periods of time. And that's it. I live in France. I just moved there a month or so ago. It's beautiful.
From where?
Before France, I was in Switzerland. Before Switzerland, I was in Sweden.
Okay.
And then there's a kind of a chain
Sure.
before that goes to all sorts of places. Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about why you originally created Mandoc?
Yes, that's actually a great story. It's a little petty though, so I'm always hesitant about telling it. But so many years ago, I'd written a system called Molt, which I think a lot of people had heard of at the time, and it was in NetBSD and OpenBSD, not in the systems proper, but and what I was doing was essentially writing a container system, not terribly unlike Jail, but more like, as I later knew it to be called, Sun containers or vServer. And I really liked this approach, although I'm not sure why anymore. There was a reason I was using it. I'm not sure exactly what it was. If I really dig back, I think sysjail, which was the thing I had written in 2000 and something, begat Molt at the proddings of, I believe it was Michael Dexter who prodded me to go from sysjail into Molt. But anyway, to make a fairly long story short, I was writing the manuals for Molt, and I wanted them to appear on the web in a nice way. So I was, writing a MDoc and converting it into HTML using Grow HTML, which just didn't look very good.
Sure.
And this bothered me a lot because I had a nice little website and everything had its own, fonts and so on. And all of a sudden there was a man page that didn't work with any of that. And I really just didn't like that at all. And it really upset me. And I get upset about these kind of things. And then upsetness turned to anger. And I thought it was unfair and that I would be judged based upon this. This is what happens when you don't work with many people, is you imagine these things. And I would be judged based upon how, not the manuals, what they said, because I believe it was Aleister Crowley who wrote at one point to say that they were completely unreadable. But it was the content, of course, and not the presentation. But me being me, and this is why I always hesitate to tell the story, I was more happy to focus on the fact that I didn't have Times New Roman, not necessarily that the manuals weren't saying anything.
Sure.
So I started what was then called, it was MDocML was the original name of it, and this is still the website domain name MDocML BSDLV. So this kind of started to gain momentum, and it split out MDoc term, it was called at the time, because I just started to think, and maybe it was again Dexter who prodded me. I don't remember exactly what happened, but there was an Asia BSD conference all of a sudden, and the rest is history. So it was taken up and continued working on it for a few years after that. Ingo, very early on, 2008, started working on it. He's been absolutely invaluable in terms of making it a usable system versus what I had, which was I can use it-able system.
Sure.
So, that's Ingo's the reason that it's something that everybody can use now, and not just me on my own manuals. That's how it started.
So where has MDoc gone? Has it been ported to many other systems? Is it?
I think all of them right now.
See?
So, it's in FreeBSD, but it's not used to actually render the man pages yet. But at dinner last night, talking to Baptiste Tresson and Benedict Röschling, it sounds like it will be very soon.
I think I actually don't know the status in terms of the other systems very well. but I think it's in many. You can find out on the m.ml website. It will say exactly
Cool.
which ones it is. The current work, I think we've focused a lot in the past few months. And when I say we, I mean predominantly Ingo has focused on MEN CGI, which was written originally for BSD CAN 2011, maybe, and there it was actually showcased, where that was the first real semantic search of manuals, which I was really happy with at the time. And again, Ingo took that and made it something that I can play with and made it usable for the rest of us. It used Berkeley DB. Originally it was a mess. Then it was really cleaned up, and now we have semantic search capabilities.
Nice.
And if you go to OpenBSD's website, I think that they use the most current version as well. M.ml BSDLV, the same one. And we're trying to pull in older BSD, not source trees, but man page trees, just because it's really interesting to read those.
And even just to watch the evolution of a utility.
Yeah.
I remember I saw an interesting talk from some other conferences, Brian Cantrill, talking about the tail utility and just how that had evolved and how they found a bug in it in the Solaris implementation where if you use the -F to keep tailing a log, if the log got rotated, it would sit at the same offset and you wouldn't see anything until the log got that big again.
Oh,
and then you would
interesting.
see the stuff. And they had a lot of trouble figuring out what was actually happening. And then when they went back to the original Unix, the old Unix man pages and saw how the stuff grew and what the man page used to say, it was
Well,
like,
it's because
wow.
it said on Solaris -F is for fail.
Something like that.
This is, what is it, mini.tus.org, I think is the name of the website, TUHS, which has all of the old Unix systems and sources available. It's a fabulous website for, and actually for the talk that I gave today, I'd spent a lot of time there. Looking through when did we originally implement cheroots or set our limit or whatnot. It's a wonderful site. So these resources are fabulous. I love them.
That's cool.
But in terms of right now what's being done, actually, Ingo and I were hacking during the conference on making the HTML output to be HTML5.
Okay, nice.
And deprecating thus the split between HTML4 and XHTML1, which I'm not sure if anybody actually used, just to make it something simple, because we had a lot of switches and kind of logic in the code that I just wanted to remove entirely.
Sure.
So it simplifies things. And what's a nice part of that, and probably the reason why I pushed in the first place, was that we get MathML as well with HTML5. And something that will be checked in soon is the ability to see EQN equations in your man pages in MathML when you output to HTML5. So I'm playing with this right now as we speak, and they look beautiful.
Yes,
That's
well,
awesome.
it's with your day job involving so much math, that must be.
This is so it's so useful, and even in looking with a lot of fairly ordinary web pages, man pages like I think xlib has equations in it, LAPACK absolutely, and I use this too much probably, but it uses a lot of equations, and you always have to squint when you're seeing on a terminal and wondering, is this division or a matrix or something? So I'm very looking forward to having the system crash, accepting those inputs, fixing it, and then being able to see it in living color. So that's, to somebody like me, that's very exciting.
Can you tell us a little bit about more about Malt and what that was and how that came about?
Molt was a lot of fun. This was years ago, and keep in mind it was never really taken up. But this was around the time that Robert Watson was writing the capabilities framework for FreeBSD,
Capsicum. Yeah.
Capsicum, and this was after he had discovered the vulnerabilities in systrace, which were a pretty big deal for me because I felt personally responsible given sysgel. So I took that pretty hard, and I thought to myself, wouldn't it be neat just to have an environment, like a virtualization environment, that would start up with the same speed as a process, where I could have everything be completely segmented. And I'm not sure if I even had a use case in mind. I just thought that the idea was so cool and so neat that I wanted it, and so I just started doing it.
Sure.
And originally I did it for NetBSD, which was a really nice code base to break into, just for things like process separation, which involved federating the process trees. I probably say the process list, so it wasn't just one array but several per instance and so on. And it was a lot of fun, but this was quite some years ago, and I mean now if I were to do it again, it would obviously be completely different. but this was talked about, the last one at DCBSD Con in 2010, I believe it was, where I gave a demo of it and everything. But it was just a huge project. And since then, when I talked about this today in my talk, I was considering whether that actually fixes or does anything useful, because it seems to me that a lot of the security problems we have would be solved in a much simpler way if we were to just use capabilities properly, or really anything at all a lot of the time.
Sure.
And it's more or less what I got into. Not the base stuff, for example, in OpenBSD, which is there's a lot of attention, obviously, that goes into the details there. But in the general stuff that a guy like me would write, where it's got to hit the ground running in 2 weeks.
Sure.
And I don't want to spend all my time looking through systrace profiles. I just want something to work quickly and beautifully, which of course is not usually how it works. But the more I looked into Capsicum, the more I thought that this does a pretty good job of bridging the gap between overly simple and overly complicated. But I haven't looked into it a lot beyond just the man pages and a little bit of the code itself, and reading Watson's papers, of course.
Right. I think it was last night or 2 nights ago you had mentioned adding Capsicum support into Mandoc.
Yes, actually. So it wasn't Mandoc, it was the CGI.
The CGI interface.
And this I still would like to do, just because we know exactly what it's going to get. And it seems that if I'm going to give a little talk on it and everything, I should probably do it. And it's not that difficult. For another open source project I've done, which is a CGI library for C, I also did this, inheriting basically from OpenSSH. So OpenSSH does a great job of, obviously, because it's OpenSSH.
Sure.
And
to do a good job.
right, and being, the sort of mental caliber above myself, I just took this and was like, I'll start with this, and usually end with it also, but with enough changes. And it's not that difficult, but it's difficult enough that you really have to sit down and really think about what they're doing and why.
Sure.
And I imported that into the CGI script, and then I thought, well, it would be nice to have that for the CGI.c as well, for Mandoc. Just for my own sense of peace of mind, that when people are running Mandoc on the fly to generate pages, I'm sure there are bugs, and I'd rather not have my own servers. Please don't exploit them.
Yes.
Exploited. Well, don't exploit them until all the sys tracing is done and the capsicuming and the sandboxing and so on. Yeah. So
I remember one of the first places Capsicum got implemented on FreeBSD was in gzip, because every time you look at a man page, you're piping it into gzip. And oftentimes you're looking at a man page as root because you're trying to do something. And you need to look it up in the manual. And so you don't want to be taking this random input and piping it into an application you're running as root.
Right.
And so they put Capsicum on gzip.
I had no idea that was the original motivation, or one of them.
Well, that was one of the first. It's easy to implement,
right.
and it was a good example of how you would use Capsicum and how it could make a big difference.
There was a conference talk, I think it was BSD Day, I think in 2012, which seems recent, but I guess it's not anymore.
Years, yeah.
And I don't remember who had done it, who did the talk actually. I just remember it was BSD 2012, and there it mentioned a whole bunch of programs that had been Capsicum.
Yeah, like TCP dump, because that's you're purposely dealing with possibly malicious traffic and so on.
There were even some like
DH
fetch syslog-d.
Yeah.
These were mentioned there, so I did briefly look at them. Some of them were very easy, and that's a credit to Watson and his design. But something along those lines is definitely required. And this is one thing I talked about today, was that we've been trying to do this since 1975. So it would be nice if this decade would be the one where we figure out how to make developers think and do things properly. But we'll see how that works out.
Cool. Anything else you want to mention before we wrap up?
Write good man pages.
Write good man
I think that this is something Ingo and I have been talking a lot about, and it seems that other people in this conference as well, that it's a bit of a problem. Not so much in the BSD community as in other communities that I'm not going to mention.
Yeah.
I think we all know what they are.
The man pages that are in the base system tend to be good, but the stuff you get from ports often is all over the map.
Sometimes non-existent.
I mean, generally just all over the map.
Right, and this is it's understandable, I guess. I mean, you want to write your system, but from our perspective, that is the system, is how it's documented. And if I have to go to Google to find something, then something is really wrong. So
that's one of the other big advantages to Mandoc is the ability to properly search the man pages. Oftentimes, you know what it is you're looking for, but you don't know which man page it's in.
Yep.
There was a neat NetBSD project a few years ago, part of the Google Summer Code, I think, where they actually implemented a full text search that used human language queries. It's in NetBSD base, I think. You'll have to ask the NetBSD folks, but you can type, for example, and I think I was just doing this, Thomas Klausner with NetBSD was showing me where you can say, apropos, how do I security? And it will, give you something, or, how do I sandbox? It would give you something there maybe. But it uses human language, and that, I think this was, it was done by a Google Summer Code student a few years ago. Would also be a neat addition. I don't know how useful it would be on the system itself. I mean, maybe it would be, and it's hard to see that, though, because of observational bias. I mean, from our perspective, we're using these systems a lot. You kind of know where everything
which
is.
man page is going to be in, but as a new user, you often you don't know where to start. And having the semantic search tools will be a big help.
There are a few people I know who are just starting out in using Unix overall, and sometimes I'm like, how do you do anything when you don't know? And the question has been asked, how do I set my password? And of course, you know instantly how do you set your password. But then I thought to myself, if I were not to know, how would I find out? I mean, apropos set password, but you get 100 things because everything has a different version of password or whatnot. And there is utility to these kind of things, even though we don't see it.
Yeah, or even just trying to document stuff. I'm always like, how did I learn how to do that?
Yeah.
I just learned it somehow 15 years ago. I don't remember.
In that part before 2 years ago, and before 30 years ago, or within this space, it was learned. I had a brief talk with somebody yesterday about an idea that Ingo and I have been kicking around for years, but we've never done, which would be a wizard-style interface for writing a simple MDoc manual. Because the bridge between understanding, I have to write in an MDoc, and actually writing MDoc is pretty huge. There are a few dozen keywords to know, and it's another language. It's like all of a sudden needing to learn HTML. It doesn't happen immediately.
Right, and even then, it's like, well, I can take an existing man page and edit it, but starting a new one from scratch seems like
how would I do that?
Is a bigger barrier. But then it's like, well, you can copy one, but you want to make sure the one you start with is a good example,
right?
Not full of bad examples.
Now, I think if you want to look at good man pages, frankly, OpenBSD would probably have the highest quality of just, syntactically, grammatically, and so on. They have JMC, who's always looking over everything. So it's a really good exemplar for how to start. But that already assumes you know what you want in the end. So kind of a step-by-step wizard, whether it be online or a little application, would be really useful, I think. Like JS Fiddle or one of these systems where you can see the output of your...
As you're doing it, yes.
That would be
something
really
like JS Fiddle for Mandoc would be amazing.
Yeah. And hopefully the person who was talking to about this yesterday is hearing you say that now.
And it kind of fits in with the man.cgi, and it really pushes the case for Capsicum if you're going to be live rendering user input.
Well, hopefully that won't be from my server.
Right.
I mean, it could be encoded in JavaScript. Really, it's not a difficult language. MDoc is. What are we really documenting? Functions, arguments to our command or whatnot. But
syntactic config files.
I would like. If I could have a wish list in terms of the community in general, it would be that people start to consider that, hey, we can write manuals. They're really easy. Because, man, I'm tired of bad manuals. I tell you.
And the interesting thing is that sometimes the person in the best position to document something is the person that just learned it.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's like, it's what I've recommended.
No bad habits yet.
Right, but it's what I've recommended to students to learn something is like, well, do it and write down documentation as you do it, and then erase it and do it again using only the docs you wrote. And if it works, then you know the docs are good.
That's good. Yeah, that could be a good. And that might be a lot for people to do, but it's.
But also, if you do it that way,
it's realistic
because you've done it twice now, not just once. You will actually remember how to do it.
Yeah,
that is true.
Plus, you have the written version that you can save, and then you never, the couple of times, when I've documented how to do something. and then years later needed to do it again. I'm like, I'm so glad I wrote that down. You know, or especially if something breaks in the middle of the night, you're gonna be like, you're so glad that you have written instructions, and if you have those, you need to share them with the rest of us.
Well, that's my wish list, and I would, if anybody wants to get involved in MDoc or learn about it, the OpenBSD lists are good to ask. If you want to go straight to more MDoc-y sort of stuff on the MDoc ML lists, there are several listed on our website. There's a graph mailing list as well. People are always happy to answer. So there's a lot of resources out there. You just gotta push the buttons on the box to make it.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Okay, before we get into our news round, of course, we want to mention the other sponsor this week, which is iXsystems, and we have some new information that we've gotten passed down the stream here about FreeNAS, first of all. So I guess a 9.3 beta is a thing now. It is hit. And we have a link to that where you can take a look about some of the release announcement for it, what's going on. This is pretty much a significant evolutionary step from previous FreeNAS releases, it says.
Yep.
So we have a simplified and reorganized web user interface, support for Windows 2012 clustering, better integration with VMware.
They have a new, more safe update system that also allows you to roll back. They're actually using ZFS boot environments for that, so that if you do an update and something goes bad, you can just switch back, which is great.
They're using Grub like we are in PCBSD. That's where they got that.
Yep, and they've also done a lot of work to make sure that you'll be able to upgrade from the beta to the release seamlessly, hoping that that will get more people to try out the beta. So if you're doing a new install, you should definitely get the beta a try.
Definitely try it out, see what you think, and of course give them feedback so they know, what's working for you. If anything's not, let them know that, of course. If you have any problems with Grub or boot environments or having the Z pool now, definitely just get in touch with them. One of the other cool changes, though, is the default iSCSI target from userland. There's also some changes to how that works with the in-kernel CAM target layer.
Yep.
It includes that's the one that includes some compatibility with Windows 2012 clustering, support for some additional VAI primitives, and increased performance in most use cases. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's the VMware and Windows Hyper-V stuff we talked about before to make if you're using FreeNAS to host the iSCSI devices for your VMware Hyper-V cluster. Those allow certain operations to be done as a single command, right? If you want to say, copy this whole virtual image disk to a second disk, or clone this virtual disk, you can just pass that as one command from the virtualizer to the FreeNAS instead of having to say, read all the bytes and write them all over here, which is wasting a whole bunch of network traffic for no reason. When obviously the FreeNAS can do that faster when it's not limited by the speed of the NIC. And a bunch of other stuff like that. They also have a bunch of other. The updates are now smaller. They use Delta patches and stuff to make it go a lot faster and make it a lot easier for people to update because they're hoping to iterate quickly. They also have from the long requested features list, configuration wizard has been set up. After you do a new install, the wizard will run it the first time you log in and make it easy to create a volume. Create the associated shares and do all that kind of setup stuff. Support for NFS v4 with Kerberos integration and allow configuring of NFS v4 from the UI and a bunch of other long requested features. And if you want to know more about that, Jordan has recorded a 20-minute video called FreeNAS State of the Union for November 2014.
Nice.
And that will it includes him walking through some of the new UI so you can get a peek at it before get all excited about it and run out and grab it.
Well, pretty slick. So yeah, obviously a lot of stuff happening in FreeNAS land right now, which of course is being sponsored and produced by iXsystems, which we need to mention the URL for that. That's iXsystems.com/BSD Now. Go ahead and go there, let them know we sent you, fill out the form, download their free guide on what you need to know before you purchase a server for open source,
exactly. And that's
you need to make to management.
Yeah, the other thing they mentioned there is that when you're buying a server for open source, so it doesn't even have to be BSD. They specialize in servers that are going to work with your open source OS, whether that's, Ubuntu, Arch, or FreeBSD or OpenBSD or whatever. And that as well, they have the full range of stuff, right? We saw the
Yeah.
nice FreeNAS minis. They actually gave one away to a lucky attendee at the conference, and you can get one of those.
That's very
And
cool.
as we saw in the demonstration they did with the hard drives and the hammers, you can actually even make that little home one into a high availability cluster for your virtual machines if you want.
Very nice.
But if you need something bigger, they will custom build you exactly what you need. Like they talk about on their article on their website about the number of spindles and how that still matters. You really have to design based on what's the worst performance that I can put up with.
yeah. What's the minimum I can live with? You need to, and then go beyond that.
Exactly. They're dealing with, if I'm going to be able to run this many virtual machines, they have to be at least this fast for it to work. And so you have to design to be able to handle that amount of load and have at least that performance. And then usually you'll get better. But you kind of know that you won't get worse. And that's the important thing.
Nice. Well, cool. Okay, we'll go definitely let them know that we sent you a course. Visit that URL and talk to those guys. They will hook you up with what you need. Everything from a mini up to a massive TrueNAS box, and they can build everything in between.
Yep.
Okay, well, time for the news roundup this week. So first up, NetBSD. We got NetBSD was at the Kanzi Open Forum 2014, and yet another Japanese tech conference.
Yep.
This is pretty cool. But I guess the NetBSD users invaded another conference, which when they do that, of course, they demonstrated that they can and will pretty much install and run NetBSD on anything. So we have everything from Raspberry Pi to Sharp NetWalkers to various Luna 68K devices. They had it all. And of course, Alan, you can probably show off
Yep, I'm
some
showing
of
a
the
bunch of
photos there.
pictures here of
Yeah.
all kinds of weird devices running NetBSD.
Well, I'll let you narrate those since I can't see what you got on the screen.
I'm
at the
not
moment.
sure which one's which at the but lots of interesting NetBSD devices.
It's just always cool. It's always fun to browse their booth and tables and see all the little gadgets they have. And,
Yep.
Little touch devices, and it runs NetBSD. What do you know?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, well, next up, getting to know your port manager lurkers. So we haven't done this one in a little while.
Right. Well, they did getting to know
took a
your
break.
port manager. So they covered everybody who's on the port manager team. So they kind of ran out of people. But then if you watched our interview back at the beginning of October with Steve Wills, he also talked a bit about how port manager lurkers works. So,
Sure.
because eventually, they'll need more people on the port manager team as port manager takes on more and more responsibility. And as, every once in a while, somebody decides that they don't want to do it anymore and needs to step down.
They
It
need
is
to step
it's a
back.
volunteer project. And so rather than at that point scrambling around trying to find someone to fill that kind of place, they've been working on Port Manager Lurker, which is basically a minor league team kind of thing. A bunch of people that are already kind of up to speed on what Port Manager does and are in on some of the email to actually know
Sure.
what's actually happening right now, so that if they need to step up and join the Port Manager team, they're already up to speed, know the process, and are already current on what's happening.
Sure. So in this series, of course, this week they interview Alex,
Yep.
one of the port manager lurkers that joined just this month.
Yep.
And I'm sure you're showing the link off there,
Yeah,
Alan.
he's originally from, I think that's the Ukraine, but currently lives in Spain.
Okay.
And he joined the...
He's
Yeah.
So he's an independent contractor who joined November 1st,
Yeah,
it
it's
looks
just
like.
a couple of days ago, I guess. How he first got inspired to use FreeBSD is that he actually tried Linux first, which is a pretty common story, and eventually got over to FreeBSD. And then talks about his mentors, Aiton Adler, and I'm not sure who the other person is there. And his most embarrassing moment in FreeBSD is he broke the port's index twice.
Hey, it happens,
Yep.
Cool. Let's see. So he's a Vim user. Let's see. What keeps you motivated in FreeBSD? He says it sucks less.
Then Linux.
So, yeah. Very true. Very true.
Talks about his music and what books he likes, and he likes green tea.
Very nice. Very nice. So cool. Yeah, take a look at that. And then you can refer back to other posts about different port manager and the new lurkers posts as well.
And there's actually a second one here. We also have Emmanuel Haupt. And he's from Switzerland, right? Yes. And he's a systems engineer. And he just joined the port manager lurker at the beginning of November. And he says that he's been using FreeBSD as his primary server and desktop operating system for quite a few years. And he always liked the documentation and found things generally easier to achieve than with Linux. And he was fascinated by the port system, so that kind of explains how he got into ports. He said, at the time, I was manually downloading Solaris packages from Sun Freeware. When someone showed me ports, I think it was no surprise that I then immediately switched to FreeBSD. He said he always found the community to be very friendly and helpful. And now that we have package NG, it feels like everything's very exciting right now, and he's happy to get into it.
Nice. Yeah, it's neat to see a lot of folks stepping up to get involved in a project like this.
Yep.
Okay, well, let's see. Next up in the news, some more NetBSD information. So it looks like their ARM port has also just achieved SMP support. So very cool. So it allows you to use, of course, more than one CPU. In particular, for ARM, they have a list of some of the supported boards.
Right, like the Banana Pi, which is kind of, well, I don't think it's actually related to the Raspberry Pi, but it's named to kind of take advantage of the hype.
Sure.
But it actually has two processors, and so if you want to use both of those, you need SMP support. And the QB Board 2, as the 2 says, has two processors, and they also have the QB Truck, which I'm guessing is a much bigger version.
Sure. I would assume by the name.
And a bunch of other processors they mention here.
Hummingbird, the Q-Box, Nitrogen 6X, etc. So yeah, this is really cool. But it looks like they're working on getting these changes into the 7 branch before 7.0 of NetBSD is released. So very cool. And there's also some pictures in the article there if you're showing those off, Alan.
Yep, there's a little QB board, which it actually has a regular VGA display port in addition to the HDMI. Quite useful if you actually want to use it as a computer as opposed to a TV.
Yeah, that's really cool. A lot of computer monitors have HDMI now, though.
Yes.
So you can do that.
And there's, they don't mention what this one is. Oh, no, they used a case from a bigger computer and then stuck a little
they just
QB board in it with a hard drive and everything. That's nice.
Yeah, I guess that's the QB Truck there.
Right.
Still, nice. Looks really neat. Might be something you have to look into building here, but of course NetBSD now supports it. So yeah, good job, guys. Hopefully you can get those into 7 before 7.0 goes out. That'd be exciting to have available.
Yeah, it's the QB Truck is a dual-core A7. Doesn't mention megahertz really, but has 1 or 2 gigabytes of DDR3. Does full 1080p display over HDMI or VGA. Has 1 gigabit Ethernet. Has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth with the antenna built in. SATA 2.0 interface for 2.5 or 3.5 inch hard drive. Although for 3.5 inch, you'll have to provide your own 12 volt power. Has NAND and micro SD or dual micro SD, depending on the version, I think. 2 USB host adapters. A bunch of LEDs and stuff. And yeah, it runs off 5 volt at 2.5 amps. And that's with running for a the laptop size hard drive. And it also apparently has support for lithium ion batteries and has a real-time clock.
Nice. Well, I'm looking here. It looks like on their website that'll run about $99 for like a QB Truck, QB Board 3 with the dual core, 2 gigs of RAM, 8 gig of flash with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. That's pretty cool. That's definitely an affordable way to build a neat little box. I suppose you could use it as like a mini PC.
Yeah.
That's pretty slick. Cool. Okay.
And lastly, we have high performance mid-range NAS server, part 2.
Sorry, I was switching tabs there. Yeah. So we have a post here on pivotallabs.com talking about how they tuned and benchmarked their FreeNAS file server for optimal iSCSI performance. So they said, to kind of go through a little bit of it here, they said for most workloads, except for ones that are extremely sequential read intensive, they recommend using L2ARC, slog, and the experimental iSCSI kernel target.
Right, specifically using the in-kernel instead of the older userland SCSI thing. They found that using that gave them 334% more IOPS, as well as increasing their sequential write performance by to 112 megabytes per second, which was capped by the speed of their Ethernet connection. Although they found there seemed to be a decrease in their read sequential read speed, but that can be due to some other things.
Sure.
They said
So
using
they-
an L2 ARC improved performance quite a bit, giving them more IOPS and improving their. They say it improved their sequential write performance, but I guess it would have. But that's a confusing metric, specifically because more of the reads would have been coming from the L2 ARC instead of the hard drive. That just meant the hard drive was less busy and could handle the reads faster because it wasn't busy doing reads at the same time. So
Sure.
having an L2 ARC doesn't affect your write performance, but it can actually, as a consequence of fewer reads coming from the disk, mean more IOPS are available on your spinning
Yeah.
disk to do writes. Yeah, that's
freeze it up.
that gets back to Brendan Gregg's question of always ask why that number is that. And he said they also experimented with a bunch of ZFS sysctls to see how those change things, but found that switching some of those would improve one metric at the detriment of some other metric. But
Sure.
that's what's supposed to happen. If there was some magic number you could set the sysctl that would make it faster always, that would be the default. Whereas, depending on what your workload is, if you only care about reads and don't care about writes, then you tune this way. If you care more about synchronous than asynchronous, you tune that way. And based on what your workload is, it's like, do you want better throughput or better latency, or do you want just certain guarantees or whatever? And that's what those sysctls are for. So you have
Sure.
to know what your workload is going to be to decide how you want to tune those sysctls. I'm working on documenting those better, but
You'll get to them when you got time, right?
yeah. Well, I have to learn how it works first.
True. Yeah, cool. But he's got a couple nice graphs on here, and describe some of their hardware config, what they used for benchmarking. I guess they used a Bonnie++ to measure disk performance.
Yeah. Do you remember how Brendan laughed when he mentioned Bonnie++ in our interview?
You
But
guys, yeah, you'll have to wait until we play.
Yeah,
that
we'll have
interview
to-
in a future episode, and you'll see what we're talking.
Sorry to tease you so bad, but
Yeah. It'll be interesting though. when you hear it.
Exactly.
That was a fascinating interview we did.
Yep.
Cool. Well, definitely an interesting blog article, something you want to take a look at if you're building a NAS or want to see how you can tweak your free NAS to get better performance for a specific workload.
yeah, it looks like this is based on a mid-range FreeNAS, and it looks like the hardware is almost identical to what you would get in a FreeNAS Mini, except for they've used a bigger case so they can get 7 hard drives instead of 4. But it's the same CPU you would get in a FreeNAS Mini if you go
Nice.
to iX and buy one of those.
Cool.
So it kind of gives you an idea of what you would get.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about the different switching over the different iSCSI targets and so on.
Well, and to kind of reiterate what you said, like they concluded, there's no optimal configuration. Rather, FreeNAS, you just configure it to suit a particular workload.
Exactly.
Well, cool. Well, fascinating article. Thanks, Alan. Okay, time for feedback and questions from you guys in the audience. So first up, we have a question from Hito asking about BSD on public computers. So he says, I've used Linux over 10 years and I've played with PCBSD and OpenBSD and VirtualBox. He said, I know of a cafe/bar that has one Windows XP box sitting in a corner. Oh, poor lonely thing. It's just wrong, and I feel like volunteering to install a better OS on that. Extra reason is that the staff consists of cute women. Well, I guess, what are you waiting for then? So he said, first I thought of installing Lubuntu, and then I thought since the staff does not seem to care about updates, OpenBSD would be more secure. Also, the rareness and obscurity of OpenBSD would help against offline attacks by customers with physical access. That may be. He said, I gather that OpenBSD's address space randomization would be the main reason why it'd be more secure than Lubuntu, especially if the updating is not done. He said, I managed to get and install an old KDE by following and applying a similar video like this, which he provides the link to YouTube. He said, can I make OpenBSD with KDE as easy as Kubuntu? Does OpenBSD have some pitfalls that make it not as easy for random cafe staff and customers even occasionally? Can all customers still plug in their NTFS or FAT formatted USB sticks for data transfer? Any other things I'm not seeing? He says this computer has 2 gigs of RAM and is 64-bit. He said PCBSD is an option still as well. He said, can I install some Linux on dual boot with Open or PCBSD as a backup option, for example, for customers who think BSD is too strange of a relative to Windows? He said the cafe staff has at least heard about Linux, but I doubt they've heard about BSD. I think we should all describe BSDs, at least for some comic folks, as Linux-like operating systems. Same with HPUX, AIX, Solaris, etc.
Yeah.
So I guess
I don't actually. Does OpenBSD have something to do NTFS? I don't actually know.
that was my question too. I don't know.
Honestly, in a situation like that, OpenBSD might not be the best choice because of their release model. Is a release every 6 months, and then they support one old one, and that's it. Whereas
Sure.
if you installed a version of FreeBSD like 10.1, that's still got like 3-4 years of support left for it. Where a cron tab of FreeBSD update will make sure that system stays up to date and gets patched up to 4 years from now, before its end of life. That might just be a better option there. Just OpenBSD is not really meant for this kind of long-term support style situation. Other than
I'll
that,
say, I'm just checking here. They do have read support for NTFS.
right?
For
Well,
sure.
I guess it was what.
And it looks like they have the Fuse NTFS 3G
Okay.
as well, possibly. So you
Right.
could do write as well.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think PCBSD might give you a much more Windows-like interface by default, like the KDE one. Honestly, that's what we did here for our office. Is I grabbed a spare computer, threw PCBSD on it, installed Firefox, Komodo Edit, and FileZilla, which are the tools that we give our developers on Windows. And he sat down at it, and I wouldn't say he didn't notice it wasn't Windows, but he had no trouble using it and didn't really.
Sure.
He was never like, I don't know how to use this, because he'd never even used Linux before. He'd always just had Windows.
It was straightforward enough, and that was what originally PCBSD was geared for. Was for Windows converts,
specifically replacing Windows XP, right?
Yeah, replacing Windows XP, exactly. So we've tried to make that as painless as possible. So that's definitely an option. But yeah, OpenBSD could be an option as well. You'll probably have to do more of the rolling it of yourself.
Right,
But,
and just to
PCBSD, you could just install it.
specifically, if his concern is updating going forward, or the fact that there won't be someone there to maintain it. The long-term support style you would get from FreeBSD might be a better bet than the update or die that you get from OpenBSD.
Cool. So as a tag to the end of his comment here, he says, you notice if you go to an ordinary shop that sells electronics, just as they sell clothing and milk, you notice some of the products have that Linux penguin alongside the Windows and Mac symbols to indicate compatibility.
I've never seen that.
Yeah, I've never seen it either, but I'll take your word for it. So he said, what are the chances that some BSD symbol will get to those packages? Should it be like the BSD Graph-Goat for consumer products that are compatible with free, open, and NetBSD? I haven't even seen how the graphics version of the BSD Graph-Goat looks like. He said, I suspect that Apple and Microsoft have to pay to get their logos on some hardware. Nobody was paying for Linux or BSD. One option might be to plead shop or shop chain to put notes on the shelves or stickers with product packages that tell what they're compatible with. Yeah, that's a difficult proposition.
Yeah, you'd have the device or whatever would have to support Linux, and then it would be in the manufacturer's interest to include that on there so that people will buy it. I've never seen them. Maybe this is something in Europe where Linux is maybe more popular at home. I don't actually know.
Well, part of it is too, like something may be supported on BSD, but maybe the manufacturer didn't directly write the driver for it, so they don't vouch for it,
or don't even know that it's supported on BSD, or don't know that there's such thing as BSD.
So
your best bet is to nag the manufacturers.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you nag manufacturers about BSD support, like you gotta make it known that you're looking for that kind of support, so that that gets in their ear, so they're like, oh, maybe we should consider BSD, and then they go look at it and go, oh, it's already supported, or oh, we need to tweak our driver, or whatever, and then make that a thing. But consumer demand has to drive this, so that they have the reason to go ahead and make it just work.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, next up, we have Brad asking about PCBSD RAM usage. He says, first off, still a great informative show. He said, I'm a recent short-term convert to PCBSD. He said, I have a couple questions about my recent trip into PCBSD that caused me to go back to the new side of things, but hopefully not forever. He said, I'm not 100% new to BSD. He said, I have a home-built FreeNAS box as my home server. He said, I wrote for episode 44 about upgrade options on storage. He said, I decided to drop that whole pool, by the way, and go start over with 6 3 terabyte Western Digital Reds and a RAID Z2 config. Very cool. He also set up the other box using the two 2 terabytes and a mirror for offsite replication at a relative's house for all the irreplaceable information. Very cool.
Very nice.
He said, current matter. He said, I've been a dedicated Linux user since sometime between 8.04 and 8.10 when I dropped Windows Vista for something better. He said, I've done a lot of distro hopping between Ubuntu, Fedora, OpenSUSE. He's been on Arch Linux for almost a year now, but I'm having constant breakages and I must have a working desktop for my job now. Mostly I need Firefox, LibreOffice, and VirtualBox to keep a Windows VM for my other Microsoft forced programs such as QuickBooks and some drawing, etc.
Yep.
He seems to be very capable desktop. Seems to be very capable giving me that. But for the day I was running it, I had some large memory usage issues. My desktop is an Asus Maximus 5 Extreme motherboard running an Intel i3770 CPU, 32 gigs of RAM, Kingston SSDs, some other 1 terabyte hard drives, etc. He said, when I was running PCBSD, I noticed that my system memory crept up to 29 gigabytes used with only Firefox and a couple tabs open and LibreOffice Calc open for about 3 hours of uptime. He said, I know ZFS uses some memory, and I noticed my system creep to a very slow speed when I opened my VM with 8 gigabyte of RAM allocation. Is it normal for PCBSD to take all available RAM during use?
Well,
So I'll go ahead and
okay.
answer this out. I know I had this exact same issue on a system I put out for somebody who was doing VMs for Windows. So by default on PCBSD, and this is something I may actually change for 10.1 if I can slip it in here this week. But we allow FreeBSD to manage the memory and let the L2 ARC creep up and use basically as much as it wants.
The main argument.
Yeah. Excuse me, the main ARC. Yes.
Well, so this specifically, like he was saying, with his FreeNAS is working great because by default ZFS will use up to 90 or 95% of all of your RAM to do caching for the file system. Because if you're building just a file server, you're not running anything else on it except for like the FreeNAS management UI. That's what you want, right? Because free RAM is wasted RAM.
Correct.
However, if you're going to have a specific workload, like I want 8 gigs of RAM to not be used by ZFS for VMs, then there's a tunable you can set.
That's exactly the problem I had. I put a system in for my wife, actually, who needed to run a Windows VM for some proprietary school applications we use. And that's what I noticed. I was like, oh, it's ZFS is eating up all the memory, and I can't start the VM now. Or when I do, it's like really slow because it's like trying to go reclaim that, and it just didn't work. So there's some tunables you can set in your loader.conf to adjust the memory usage of ZFS.
Yeah, the ArcMax, it's called.
Yes, you can set the kernel KMEM and the ArcMax and go that route. So that's something it's a good thing you reminded me about this. I've been meaning to put this in for a while, but this may be the motivation I need to do it. But I'm going to put something in
the installer or in the control panel. Well, something in the control panel that you adjust might be useful, but even in the installer, just setting the default to like 75% instead of 95%.
I'm going to do it. Yeah, I'm going to do it for the installer first. For 10.1, I mean, we're looking at releasing next week, so I can't do any GUI changes. But what I will do is put something in the installer that tries to reserve more memory for actual desktop usage, so you're not having the cache just eat up everything. And I'll try and
for even ArcMax, maybe even 50% is a more reasonable default for a desktop.
Well, we already have some memory detection routines in the installer, so it detects how much RAM you have, and I'll just look at that and maybe set some reasonable defaults on that. And then, of course, once it's set, there's no reason you can't change it yourself.
Exactly.
Like if you want to give more or less.
Yeah. So I would say probably 50% or something for a desktop. That's what I did on my file server because I knew I was going to want to run VMs on it too.
Sure.
ZFS will give back that RAM if there's enough memory pressure, but the detection's not perfect. And it's
it
slow
can
while
take a
it's
while.
doing
It's
that.
slow. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is. So I'll probably do something. So I know I run a bunch of systems here that have 2 and 4 gigs of memory, and on those I've tuned it down to like 500 megs.
Right.
Like, that's all you get because I want more
and
room for Firefox. And
you shouldn't have to adjust the KMEM stuff unless it's i386, and PCBSD doesn't do that anymore. So just the ArcMax should do it.
Just the ArcMax. So that's a good excuse for me to go ahead and put that in. So I'll try and see if I can slip that in for 10.1 for you. So
the other thing is,
until next week and grab it, like you can try that out, see how it works for you.
Specifically, he mentioned that all of his RAM was showing up as used. If you're looking at the top display on a FreeBSD system of any type, really, it should be broken out separately. So the active is the used memory, and ZFS doesn't show up there. It shows up under wired. And if you're on a newer FreeBSD, which all PCBSDs will be, there's actually a separate line in the top display that has just the ZFS information, or it's labeled ARC,
Yep.
and it tells you, for example, on this box I have here, I currently have 9 gigs of memory being used by programs, 1 gigabyte that's inactive, meaning it had been used, but it hasn't been zeroed out. It's currently being used for cache. 5 gigs is wired, and there's about a gig free. Of the 5 gigs that's wired, 2 of that is the ARC, right? The ARC is currently 3 gigs, with 273 of that is most frequently used. 1.7 gigs is most recently used. There's a couple 100K of anonymous, which is stuff that hasn't been allocated yet, and 111 megs that are headers, which is the metadata, and then there's 900 gigs that's other, which is stuff waiting to be flushed.
So the way my system's configured here, I got 12 gigs of memory, and I've capped my ARC at 2 gigs because I run a bunch of 2 gigabyte VMs at a time sometimes. So I'd like to have 8 gigs ish free for my applications and my programs and VMs and whatnot. But I capped it at 2, and then leave some other. That way it leaves plenty for everything else I want to do.
Especially if you're going to run a database server or something, you definitely have to tune that back. I've actually thought about recommending maybe getting FreeBSD to change the default from 95 to something that kind of exponentially backs off as you have more RAM or something.
Well, I don't. The thing about the KMEM or the ARC setting is I don't think it accepts a percent at this point.
No.
You still have to do the calculation to figure out, okay, this much RAM, this is how much I want to allow. So, but I'll pop that into our install script because again, we already detect the memory, so that's a real easy thing to splat in and set that for you out of box. So you don't have to worry about it. But post, if you want to change that, bootloader.conf is where you'll take a look for that, and you'll see your ARC sizes, and then you can adjust to your use case. Okay, so who's next? I'll let you read the next one from Tyler.
Yes, so Tyler asks about IPs and installers. He says he has multiple IP addresses, and I would like to use them as a sort of virtual servers. For example, to run mailing lists, etc. Is there an easy way to create a virtual interface, give it the IP address of one of the public addresses, and then give that to the jail? Says you can firewall that interface through the host. The only other way means is a lot of tuning controls based on IP access and so on. I don't know if he's ever used jails before, but you just put the extra IPs as aliases on your main interface, and then when you give a jail an IP address, it only sees that IP address and none of the other ones. So when you're inside the jail, you still see your EM0 or whatever your interface is, but it only appears to have the one IP that you're allowed to use in the jail, or multiple IPs if you assign them. But so we can see all your interfaces, although they all appear as not configured, except for the IP addresses that the jail is specifically allowed to use, and that'll do what you want, most times anyway.
Sure.
He says he's interested in doing a headless install of FreeBSD or PCBSD. And he says, as you mentioned before, that he's blind, and thus text-based installers, while awesome, are 100% unusable unless he has some kind of serial port or something. But he hasn't seen one of those on a new computer in a while. I guess oftentimes you can get USB ones, but I don't think those would work until the driver is attached, which would be way too late for the installer. He says.
He also says.
Sorry, I lost my place.
No. Yeah. Oh, he says, is there some way to automate the install or do something else that would get me up and running?
Yeah, he's also he's wondering, if he does this in a VM. Because in a VM would be hard too, because I don't think a screen reader is going to be able to use that either. Is it perhaps a way to automate the install or something? Well, you have the scripted installs, but you have to do the install ones first.
Yeah, you do the install ones first to generate the script, and then you can create the image. So we just added pre-built VirtualBox images. I'm not sure if that would help you.
That might,
for 10.1. Also, you may be the one who requested it even, but we've had several requests in the past for screen readers, like you mentioned here, like Orca. And I would love doing it. I have no problem doing it. I could use some help from people in the community maybe to get that configured and working with our installer and stuff. I just haven't had the timer bandwidth to sit and really hack on it.
Yep.
But if this is a project somebody would like to take up, we'd be more than happy to consider putting it into the PCBSD installer. Cool.
And next, Jim asks about jails and firewalls. Yes. He says, howdy lads. Having recently started playing with jails, is there a way to set up a firewall, preferably on its own jail, but he's not sure about that, so that each jail can only talk to other jails as defined in the firewall? and the outside world can only talk to those jails with public services defined in the firewall. He says the goal is to configure the firewall so that the database server, which is in a jail, is only accessible from the web server, which is in its own jail, and the logging server, which is in another jail, is only accessible from the other jails, not the outside world. And he says thanks for any hints and so on. There's a couple different ways to do this. Specifically for stuff like the database, is you can give it an internal IP address, which is what I did. You can just find some range of IPs that's not in use, like your 10 range or your 192.168 or whatever, and bind those on the loopback adapter, and then define the jail that way. And then your other jails will be able to get to them, but the outside world won't because they only have non-routable internal IP addresses. Obviously, your web server will have to have a public IP address, or it can have a private, and then you have to run a reverse proxy or something on the host to get the data into the web jail, or use the firewall to forward the packets that way. Sure. But yeah, this is a pretty common setup. So yeah, you can do your logging jail and your database jail on the loopback adapter, and then your web jail public facing, and that way no one can ever reach the database except for the web jail. If you use vimage, you can actually run a firewall inside each jail, but it's probably a lot more setup than you really need. The other thing is a regular firewall on the host will see the packets between the jails, just they'll be over the local host adapter, because if you're sending a packet from, even if both your jails have IPs that are on your public interface, when they're talking to each other, that's actually going through loopback, because that's what the routing table says, right? If you're in the same, if the IP is on this machine, don't try to send it out to the network, make it bounce off the switch and come back to us. That'd be a waste.
Sure.
And so it gets routed over localhost. So you just have to, in your firewall rules, make sure that you're actually checking for those packets on the loopback adapter instead of not. Most firewalls would just say allow everything on the loopback adapter and then start the firewall.
We trust that, yeah.
And you'll have to just firewall it sooner that way.
Cool. Okay. Well, last up is Brad. He says he's got another question for us. He says, I finally got my FreeNAS box up and running. At this point, I have a couple of issues with the setup, one that I could use your advice on. He said, I built based on Brian Moses' EconoNAS build that was briefly mentioned on BSD Now. So he said, I bought the motherboard he recommended, which was a BioStar long model number here. This board has a Realtek RT111F NIC in it. My first question, I did some quick searches and found that the older Realtek cards had problems with FreeBSD. I was just wondering if the newer ones do as well. What I'm seeing is that I have a Foundry Fast Iron 2 switch in my basement. It has 8 ports of GigE fiber, 8 of GigE copper, and 4810 100 ports.
It's a beefy switch.
The Realtek, what was that?
That's a beefy switch.
It is quite a beefy switch, yes, for your basement. Said when I plug the Realtek into a 10100 port, it works fine. But when I plug into a GigE port, I get nothing. No link, nothing. While booting the FreeNAS box goes link up, DH client attempt, link down, ad nauseum. He said, I've checked both ends of the connection. Both are gig, auto negotiate, and full duplex. The only thing I'm not sure about is whether or not spanning trees is being turned on the ports is going to be an issue. He said, I do have 3 Linux boxes running gig, so I'm not sure. Any ideas?
I'm not sure. I always get Intel NICs for my machines.
Sure. I guess the first place to start, and I don't know if I talked to you on IRC about this too, but somebody had a similar question. It's like, take a look at the man page for that driver specifically, see if there's any notes on running in gig mode or whatever, if there's a sysctl that needs to be set.
Have you tried a different cable? I don't know if he says that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he had tried another cable or not, but yeah.
The spanning tree shouldn't matter. That's for when you plug switches into each other so they don't create a routing loop or a packet loop. So the spanning tree setting shouldn't matter for an end node. Okay. I wouldn't have recommended that motherboard because it has a Realtek NIC, honestly. But,
as Alan has said, go Intel with your NICs. But yes.
on Newegg, the Intel Pro 1000 CT PCI Express NICs, I had to buy a bunch of those when my Ethernet switch got hit by lightning and fried the onboard NICs in all my motherboards. They're like $12 to $15 a piece, and they work very nicely as an alternative.
Okay. Well, that's definitely an option.
but
But
yeah,
yeah, take a look at the man page first. Just make sure
he's
there's
running
no note in there.
FreeNAS. You might also try the 9.3 beta. It might have a newer driver for that Realtek that might solve the problem as well.
Correct. Okay. Well, cool. Well, let us know how that works.
But yeah, I'd also
Hopefully,
try a different
find
cable just
solution.
in case it was that.
Mm-hmm.
Or,
Cool.
try it with the same cable and the same port as one that you know is working on one of your Linux boxes and see.
Just to make sure.
Yeah, that way it's not some configuration on that port or something with the cable or something. Use known good everything except for the one thing that's in question, and it'll help you debug a little faster.
Okay. Well, awesome. Well, we're going to move right on now into our mailing list gold for the week, where we do have some cool items and a couple funny ones. So, first up, this one's not so much funny as it is just informative to read, but there was a thread on the OpenBSD list about LibreSSL specifically. Did you read through these, Alan?
I
You
haven't
wanna
read the
describe
whole
them?
thread. It's many, many, many posts.
Yes, yes. So I I sifted through them a little
Okay.
bit earlier this morning, and definitely an interesting thread talking about a patch that was sent in to LibreSSL, quite a large
To
patch. and
implement a
it's-
new protocol, GOST.
Someone called out the person submitting it, though, for being suspicious because, sending in diffs to various core critical and crypto projects makes it sound like, maybe they work for a specific group or something trying to infiltrate and all those things. So anyway, the thread kind of devolved into a discussion of trust in the code review process, especially in security applications like LibreSSL, which just an interesting read. Theo got involved, so that was cool.
Finding the first time Theo said something.
Yep. So let's see. Next up here, you want to read the next one, Alan?
So when the question of trust came up, Theo said, "Well, do you trust me? And do you trust Moid, who's one of the other guys doing a lot of the work on LibreSSL?"
Sure.
And he goes, "Why?
Yeah.
Really, precisely, why do you trust Theo and Moid?" And then, going forward,
Well, and the point is, you got to review it too.
yes.
They're not just allowing a blind commit to go in.
Yeah, and
that's
they
not being
can't
looked at.
decide whether the code is good or bad based on if they trust the person that wrote it. They have to look at the code and decide if it's good or bad. It's not so much a question of trust as a question of correctness versus not.
Yeah, because exploitable stuff's not always done on purpose. A lot of times it's just mistakes and bugs cause exploits. So they got to look for that too, even if the intentions are 100% pure.
Exactly.
It still needs to be reviewed. Cool. Okay, next up, another OpenBSD post this week. So about, USB 3.0
Yes,
support.
so
So I'll let you read that one here, Alan.
So they did a commit to enable XHCI, which is obviously USB 3.0, and it says most of the features work. However, if you plug a USB 1.0 or 1.1 device in, which hopefully not too many people still have those, they'll only work if it's connected to the root hub and not to a secondary hub, and if you are not using the isochronous transfer mode, which isn't supported yet. But those pretty rare cases, so for most stuff it should just work. And then someone commented that, and there was much rejoicing, yay. And Moid commented that it was all because of the power of cheese.
They are French,
Yes,
by the way.
the developers that worked on this are French, and so they say that all of this work was powered by cheese.
So, your USB 3.0 support is cheese powered.
Yes, I don't know. There was a whole bunch of stuff on Twitter about this as well, and it's like, did somebody pay him in cheese to write the driver?
Right?
Or what?
Well,
Yes.
it might have been an expensive cheese.
Yes.
You don't know.
Well, yeah, it's French people and their cheese.
Cool. Okay, and lastly, we have a NetBSD post this week.
Yes.
So Jared posted to the mailing list, "Hey, I'm trying to port NetBSD to my cup of tea, but it keeps kernel panicking on refill. This is odd because I ported it to my toaster and my bookcase easily enough, and it survives bread and book replacement just fine. Any hints?"
Well, I don't know
So
about
Peter
him,
writes
but,
back.
it runs on my cup of tea just fine.
Right. He says, so yeah, speaking of, my cup of tea as well, it works just fine.
But yes,
It's a nice Meat BSD logo on it too.
Yep.
Now, let me finish reading this here, but he says, so what kind of tea are you using? It needs to be thread safe. You can determine if the tea is thread safe by placing a length of white cotton thread inside the tea and rinsing the thread out and determining if the color of the thread has permanently changed. So that
yes.
is a good point.
If your tea stains the thread, then it's not thread safe, and that's why you're having trouble getting NetBSD to run on it.
Definitely. So, yeah, good comeback, Perry. That was
Yes.
nice. I like that.
For the record, it's the developers that run on T, not the operating system.
Yes. Although a lot of times it's, yeah,
Yeah.
mostly coffee here in the States,
Yeah, or
but yeah.
beer if you want
Or
development
beer,
done.
yes. Depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, of course, let us know if you guys find more stuff like that. We do love to pass that on.
Yeah.
So as we close the show here, a couple things we'll mention. So all of our tutorials will be posted in their entirety at bsdnow.tv, so go check them out. The OpenBSD router tutorial also has a new section on bandwidth throttling, which we're going to show you in a moment on the tutorial today, so take a look at that. We also have links on site to a MeetBSD recap post, which is definitely worth reading, as well as a review of the new book of PF, so take a look. Speaking of that, Peter Hanstein's book of PS so far has raised a total of $3,050 for the OpenBSD Foundation.
Nice.
So very cool. Good job, guys. And he said, as usual, you want to send your questions, comments, show ideas, topics, or stories you want mentioned on the show to feedback@bsdnow.tv. So we do the show for you guys. So you need to let us know if there's something specific you'd like to see covered, especially if you have a new tutorial idea.
Yep.
We'd love to do that and pass it along.
Yeah, and the whole feedback section is powered by your questions. So send in your questions, free help.
Yep.
And we are taking suggestions for the mailing list gold stuff. We can't read every single mailing list. We try, but
Sure. You try. We catch a lot of them, but yeah, there's some things.
If you know something particularly funny that you saw, let us know and we'll stick it in there.
Cool. So, of course, try and watch us live Wednesdays as well, 2 p.m. Eastern or 1900 UTC, since the time has changed here now.
Yep.
But definitely, we'd love to have you with us live as we do the show, and we can interact with you on IRC. If you have a question or something you want to point out or clarify,
Yes.
that's a good way to do it
You
while
can
we're actually recording.
Troll us in real time like Dan does sometimes.
Yes. So that does work. So thank you guys so much for being with us this week on the show. We look forward to seeing you again same time next week.
Yep. Okay, for this week's tutorial, we're just going to talk a little bit about bandwidth shaping and throttling with PF. This is the newer PF that's in OpenBSD. This is basically a whole new section that was added to our OpenBSD router tutorial, which we constantly update and has become a living document of awesomeness. So if you share your internet connection with other users or other people in your house, I had this problem when I had roommates in college. They would run their file sharing apps not with bandwidth limits set and, cause my connection to be really slow, which caused me problems when I was trying to play Counter-Strike and so on. So I had to come up with a solution similar to this. So PF provides a way to assign packets to different queues and then giving those different queues specific bandwidth limitations or weights to decide. So there are two approaches to throttling. There's one is setting a maximum limit a connection can use or reserving a minimum amount that will always have access to. Since we're nice, we'll just reserve a minimum amount of certain types of traffic that are particularly annoying to use while all the bandwidth is hoarded. So in this case, rather than saying, all types of traffic are limited to this much, we'll say keep at least this much traffic available for SSH and a couple other things that are latency sensitive, and then use up all the rest of it for whatever else people are trying to do. You probably don't want your interactive SSH session lagging because somebody's downloading a torrent or something. Being forced to wait 10 seconds for a website to load because someone is uploading a video of their cat is also unacceptable. So for this example, we'll focus on SSH, FTP, and HTTP. The PF man page has additional details on all the different things you can do with the queuing, but we'll assume that you have a 20 megabit connection and you can adjust these numbers up or down based on what connection you actually have. So you see we create a queue called limits on the EM0 interface, and we give it a bandwidth of 20 megabytes or 20 megabits per second. Then we create a queue called shell, which is inside the limits. So that way it inherits that 20 megabit limit. And we give it a bandwidth of 1 megabit and a minimum bandwidth of 1 megabit. That will make sure that there's 1 megabit of that 20 megabits is always reserved for doing SSH. Then we have a queue for FTP, which also lives under the limits queue and has a bandwidth of 8 megabits with a maximum of 8 megabits. And then for the web, we will assign a web queue with a bandwidth limit of 5 megabits with a minimum of 5 megabits, but a maximum of 10 megabits, and it's the default queue for anything that doesn't match one of these other queues. So in this example, protocols each get assigned their own queue. 1 megabit will always be reserved for SSH, and so on for FTP and HTTP. Then we have to add firewall rules that will actually route traffic into those queues. So all outbound traffic that's TCP and going to port 22, then we set the queue to shell. If it's going out on port 20, which is the FTP data port, 21, which is the FTP control port, or 989 and 990, which are FTP over SSL, then we put them in the FTP queue. And if it's going over port 80 or 443 for HTTP or HTTPS, then we put it in the web queue. So once you enable throttling, your full config will look like this. Just an example, we have these queues in here, and then we have our rules passing that stuff. You'll make sure you have these after your block rules, so that otherwise you'll allow traffic that you meant to block. Remember that by default, PF is the last match wins, but if you put the quick keyword, then the first match wins. If you want to throttle both download and upload, then you have to put this on or do per interface basis. You just have to modify the rules slightly. Currently we're only passing the outbound traffic into the queue. You could have a separate set of queues for inbound traffic and do pass into those, etc. With PF's powerful syntax, you can create and combine this with different IPs and host masks. For example, certain websites could have higher priority than others and things like that. It's you could specifically try to limit the bandwidth used by YouTube. It's also possible to limit specific users' connection to a video streaming site based on their UID and the destination address and stuff like that. You can also add groups that have no limits and so on. I wrote a journal article similar to this about doing traffic shaping and queues with IPFW on FreeBSD, and you can get that in the FreeBSD journal May-June edition about networking. And it talks about the example, if your company has a 20 megabit internet connection and you have the IT department and everybody else, you want to make sure that the IT department can always get 10 of those 20 megabits. But if they're not using it, you don't want it to go to waste just by limiting everybody else to using 10 megabits. So with queues, you can say, if the IT department's using it, their bandwidth takes priority. But if they're not, then use that excess bandwidth for everybody else so that, the whole 20 megabits can be used all the time, but higher priority traffic will take higher priority. And yeah, that's how you do queues and bandwidth shaping with PF.